starting to take on an appearance of Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. He's actually looking at you. Yeah, I don't want you looking at it. It appears he has a different skill set. 779 and Texas and Sheikah for cases and deaths.
All these chairs.
I know. They're way better than the other choice, though, trust me.
I'm trying to decide how to do this mic.
If you can on the other side, because you probably be looking at him more often.
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap it so that the cord doesn't hang weird.
That won't go in there.
Trying to figure it out. Yeah, I mean, I can do it, but yeah, take
Good gap tape.
yeah, a little bit of gap tape.
Yes.
How are you?
Thank you, Steve. Good to see you too. You're looking healthy. Just single glass.
Couple miles this morning, probably do a couple miles again tonight.
So I thought you might want
Clear
to.
the head and
I thought you might want to start by asking, hey, we just did this in December. What's changed since then?
Anything new going on?
Was it really in December?
Yes.
Feels like 100 years ago.
I'm gonna let you mic yourself up.
okay.
Okay. If you have a piece of gap tape, I take it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not behind stage.
Do you want a second?
Do we want tie or jacket, or you guys have a preference for where this goes?
Up on my, yep, right there. We just had to take.
Hey, Steve, I
There
forgot
it
to
is, I
take
see it.
a picture. If Andy, oh yeah, Andy could take a picture and send it to me.
We need to have a picture for video report too. So we can, I can stand over here and you can get the three of us. Mayor, thank you.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So Andy, you want to grab my phone and take a shot?
Okay. You guys be sitting just casual. She's gonna introduce from here. When you're done with your intro, I want you to walk around
Behind
this
the
way.
cameras, right? And I'll go over to that chair and then I'll do the questions. And then I'll do the close as well.
For the picture though, Andy, do you want Tommy
Standing.
standing?
Yeah, we'll get you guys in.
We all played it.
Just take a cup. Am I part of the part? I think this is fine.
Emphasizing the distance. Okay? We got it.
All right, thanks. And then you can just put my phone over there.
The East Gorilla arms can't touch you, that's for How we doing on time, guys?
Dogs. We sleep all day, we eat too much, we can't wait to get outside, and a car ride just excites us.
Oh, they want me to ask you about red, white, and boom.
Sure.
That decision hasn't been made yet. has it?
Sure, yeah, I ran. And red, white, and boom, whatever.
Is that what you're asked all the time?
Oh, just
Well, you know what
the
kills me?
variety of things that a mayor gets asked, just like you get asked about everything
I
news-wise, you
know,
know.
but
it's-
people don't realize they think the city
30
owns red,
seconds.
white, and
See
boom.
me do 5, 4, 3.
Do I need to tuck this thing in, any more of this wire?
Is my mic on too?
Yep.
Okay,
I think it's all right.
No, I think you look good.
All right.
yeah.
Yeah,
you
it's
look
not
fine.
gonna show up from here.
These chairs are not comfortable for me because my legs aren't long
I'm a
enough.
sloucher, so I gotta listen
Yeah,
to my
me
mother.
too.
I hear my mother's voice.
Sit up straight, enunciate, speak slowly.
Which is my camera that I'll be talking to when I welcome everybody?
Will be mostly on you.
When I'm welcoming everyone, is that what you want me to talk into, or do you want to do that on a two-shot at the beginning?
So primary number 1 is right here. So if
Okay.
you're looking over here, I can stand over here a little bit.
Okay.
Actually, that's why we have Jane here too. So you're looking over
Right,
this area.
okay, oh, well, she's welcoming everybody.
She is.
Yeah, okay.
But you want me to sit over there during the show, right?
No, I want you to sit right here, next to the microphone.
Oh, okay, all right. Then you better put my phone over there. Great. I'm not used to being the one on TV. Because I do the welcome and then I get to go sit down, which is perfect as far as I'm concerned.
It really is.
Sure is.
When this first opened up, we had dinner here, Lori and I. We were sitting by the window, I was already up for something, we were talking, we said, "You know, it's opposite from when I found a body over there, and one of the homeless men," I said, "Oh, this is so romantic."
That's the romantic.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. We're streaming live from the Boathouse at Confluence Park. I'm Jane Scott, and it's a privilege to be the president and CEO of the Columbus Metropolitan Club and to welcome you here today. We really appreciate you being with us. We really miss you, and we wish so much that you could be in the room with us, but we're appreciative of the technology that allows us to have this conversation and to convene over the internet and through live streaming. We are grateful for your attention. We're also grateful for today's support, which is supported by, today's live stream is supported by PNC, the Puffin Foundation West, the Columbus Foundation, MORPC, the Tom E. Daly Foundation, the Columbus Dispatch, and the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center. We also want to thank all of you who support the Columbus Metropolitan Club through your continued membership, and for all of those of you who stepped up to purchase virtual seats today. These dollars are critical for the Columbus Metropolitan Club's well-being, and I want you to know that there's still time. You can go online right now and make a donation to the Metropolitan Club at www.columbusmetroclub.org. We'd also like to welcome a new member today, Steve Miller of the United Negro College Fund. Thank you, Steve, and welcome to the Metropolitan Club. And we hope that maybe some of you who are visiting Metropolitan Club for the first time will also consider becoming a member. There's no question that these are difficult times. Simple personal conveniences have become luxuries. Businesses are challenged by closures and unpredictability. And the weaknesses in the social fabric have been greatly magnified. Our lives, our city, and our region are benefiting from clear vision and a steady hand. With focused leadership and all of us working together, we know we'll reach that light at the end of the tunnel. A public servant since 2001, Mayor Andrew Ginther has served as a school board member, on City Council since 2015, and as the 53rd mayor of the City of Columbus. Let's welcome Mayor Andrew J. Ginther. Thank you, Mayor. And our host today, Emmy Award-winning journalist, host of NBC4, The Spectrum, a counselor at law, and a CMC board member, Colleen Marshall. Colleen, we're looking forward to the conversation today. Thank you both for being here.
Well, there is such a broad range of topics to go over with you, Mr. Mayor, and of course, COVID-19 dominating the conversation in our homes, in our businesses, in our communities. Let's talk first about city government, how it's changed your functions and how you think Columbus is doing so far.
Well, I could not be more proud of this community in the way that we have responded with the governor's stay-at-home order, with practicing social distancing, here in our forum here today and at parks and gatherings, grocery stores, pharmacies, the essential places people are still going. They're wearing masks. They're practicing social distancing. But one of the things we continue to talk about is how everybody has a role to play in protecting our first responders by staying at home and making sure that our police officers, our firefighters, our nurses, our doctors are able to do their jobs, answer those calls for service, and help people who are suffering right now in facing a deadly virus. They're able to do that when we take personal responsibility to stay at home and let them do their jobs. But I think if you look across this state, just got off the phone with Governor DeWine and other big city mayors that I took in the parking lot before I came in here. And what you're seeing is a remarkable spirit of compliance, I think, across this state. Nothing's perfect, but I couldn't be more proud of the way people here in Central Ohio and around the country are staying at home and protecting themselves, their families, but also our first responders.
There certainly is the impression that the cities and the state government are working well together.
Sure.
You're a Democrat, and I know you were among the Democrats who were giving high marks to this Republican governor.
Mm-hmm.
We're also starting, though, to see protesters gathering outside
Sure.
the State House. People are weary. They are afraid about their family finances, and there's a lot of pressure. When is government going to get up and running again? When you're having these conversations with the governor and with the other mayors, are you getting any insight into when that gradual startup might actually begin?
Well, the governor and his team are already contemplating that and thinking about that. They're engaging mayors, but still remaining, listening to public health experts. Because the last thing that we want to have happen is, had such great success in slowing the spread, not overwhelming our health systems, and not losing more of our neighbors to this deadly virus, to have a resurgence come in the summer because we rushed back into it. I'll also say that there are also small business owners, restaurateurs. Cameron Mitchell, one of our most famous and successful native sons in the restaurant business, has been very clear with folks that he has the ability to reopen once. And so we have to be thoughtful, thorough, and make sure that as we gradually reopen, that we're continuing to practice social distancing and changing the way maybe we work and how we gather, how we continue to meet. There are things that we've started during this crisis that are going to have to continue. We're going to continue to encourage people to follow the CDC and public health experts' recommendations about wearing masks in public and those types of things. So there's not going to be a light switch that flips off. This is going to be a gradual returning to a new normal. But we have to remain vigilant against this virus until we have a vaccine and we have testing in place to make sure that we're all safe.
So I've heard you mention Cameron Mitchell before, saying he has the ability to start up once. I think a lot of people don't understand what that means, that, he has supplies to get, he has people to get back on board. What is the financial drain for a massive restaurant company or any other kind of business that has to be in the business of restarting its functions? Well,
in his case in particular, I think he has said publicly that, 2 weeks before the outbreak of this virus here, in this community around the country had 4,500 employees. 2 weeks later, he had 6. And so, that gives you some insight into the challenges that even the most successful restaurateurs and business folks face, is that they can't reopen more than once. They will not have the wherewithal, the financial resources, the backing, the materials, the goods, the services, and the people power to potentially start over and over again. And so that, I think it really underscores how critically important it is to be thoughtful about this. And I know that's what the governor is doing, not just with business leaders, but with public health experts and medical experts, to make sure that as we reopen gradually the economy in Ohio and certainly here in Columbus, that we're doing it the right way the first time.
This city has been very successful in neighborhoods like the Short North, now Franklinton, certainly, even Grandview, the areas that have these, hip young restaurants and a workforce of people, and I'm not talking just about in their 20s, but in their 30s and 40s, who have made a pretty good living in the restaurant industry here, the chefs, the waiters, the bartenders, who are suddenly out on the unemployment line. Is there anything being done to help those kinds of workers who might not have the wherewithal to financially stand this kind of sudden stop to their income?
Well, obviously, we've been very supportive of what's been done on the federal level with the CARES Act in kind of phase 3 of stimulus. And as you know, there's conversations now in Washington about a 4th phase where we're pushing very hard for more resources to come back to local government so we can continue to provide basic city services for those that may be unemployed or displaced. But it's really important for folks to remember there are kind of 3 phases to what we're facing right now with this crisis. The first phase is the public health crisis. And quite honestly, if we don't handle the public health crisis the right way, we really don't get to the second and third phase of this. The second phase is the human service crisis. There is huge need out there right now. You know, folks that are unemployed, that you know, are having to educate their children at home, you know, with distance learning, continuing to balance. Some folks don't have jobs to go back to. Some folks, their pay has been dramatically cut and impacted, but the costs of living are still what they were before the crisis. And so making sure that we're investing, you know, we've made significant investments into the Community Shelter Board, to Meals on Wheels for seniors that may need access to nutritious meals during this crisis that are feeling scared to leave their homes. And so having those types of services, but also small businesses, particularly folks maybe that haven't had much interaction with the federal government before. So we've engaged the Urban League to help us with SBA loans, particularly for small minority, female-owned companies that are facing catastrophic challenges with respect to their businesses. So we're going to continue to invest in those human service needs, basic needs. We're focused on food and shelter right now. And we know that this is not going, when the stay-at-home order changes or as we return to some sort of normalcy, those human service needs aren't going away. I mean, we had a crisis around affordable housing before COVID-19, and that isn't going away. But we're going to really focus on food and shelter during that phase, and then obviously the third part of the phase. And of course, these don't start and stop neatly. This is not a tidy process. We've got a health crisis, a human service crisis, and an economic recovery that we're planning. But what's really important to us as we plan for the recovery is we think about those who were on the edges of the economy before this started, who have been totally displaced and in some cases wiped out. We have to view our recovery through an equity lens, making sure that shared prosperity is part of our plan for the future with economic recovery and not simply letting things happen on their own based on market forces. If we want to see that equity agenda that I talked so much about at the State of the City back in February, for us to realize it.
You know, I know Dr. Mashika Roberts from the City Health Department has been very active in working closely with Dr. Amy Acton about how the city itself is going to respond to the health crisis part of all of this. We are seeing around the country a racial disparity and who's being not only comes down with COVID-19, but who's dying from COVID-19. And it seems as if the African American community is particularly stressed by this virus. Are we seeing that here in Columbus? And how are you, as the mayor of the largest urban city in the state of Ohio, how are you monitoring that, or are you seeing those kinds of hot spots here that we need to be worried about?
Well, we knew that race was a public, you know, a huge part of a public health crisis before this all started. Back in the State of the City, I asked Dr. Roberts and her team to delve into race as a public health crisis and to come back with strategic recommendations for us to go after those disparities, whether it's chronic disease and obviously the impact COVID-19 has had, much higher rates with African Americans nationally, statewide, and here in Columbus with contraction, complications, severity of the illness, the length of the duration of the illness, and obviously fatalities. So we believe that COVID-19 has simply shined a light on and exposed the disparity that already existed, and it is having deadly consequences. And so I think for us as a community, and Dr. Roberts has already launched a new initiative to focus on racism as a public health crisis, and is working with her team to bring back recommendations to guide our work moving forward. It's going to be a critical part of the equity agenda that we talked about, because you're absolutely right. African Americans are receiving a disproportionate negative impact from COVID-19, with contraction, with severity, duration of complications, as well as fatalities. But it's part of a larger public health crisis around racial disparities that we have to acknowledge and address if we're going to move forward as a community.
You know, the second part of this you talked about was the stress on services and the stress on, you know, the tax dollars that prop up those services and try to reach out to the community. We remember back in 2008, well, the last time we had a financial crisis nationwide, there were strains on the city budget, and we talked about cuts, and you know, we did get some questions coming in from people who registered for this event. One of them is from Kelly. Do you anticipate a hiring freeze for Columbus Police, particularly with the group that is nearing final offers to be in the next academy class? They want to know, she says you're doing a great job, but she wants to know what this is going to do. Is there a hiring freeze?
Well, we have a hiring freeze in place right now, except for critical essential services. So obviously, Dr. Roberts, who is a running point for us in this public health crisis, has added folks, and we're going to continue to add staff to her team to deal with this public health crisis that's emerging. But we are thinking about the future. We've been very proud that we've been able to invest in robust number of police and firefighter classes for the last several years. Because this community supported and voted for the future back in 2009 when they had a chance to weigh in. And so we have more police officers and firefighters on the street right now than we've ever had in our city's history. But we know that we have to continue to have police and fire classes in order to offset the folks we're losing through retirement, through the DROP program. And so we're going to continue to make that a top priority. Public health and safety is the core of our commitment and our covenant with the people of Columbus. And so that will continue to remain a top priority. But for you and I sitting here today, the mayor of Akron has furloughed 600 workers. The mayor of Cincinnati has furloughed 1,700. So that is the reality of what's going on around the state and the country. One of the things we'll probably get into is how different Ohio local governments are than the rest of the country. 78% of our general fund, which pays for police officers, firefighters, our basic city services staff, 78% of that comes from income tax. Only 2% of local governments in America, 2% of local governments in America are funded through individual income tax. And so nobody is in more of a excitement and energy about reopening the economy than mayors and local leaders around the state of Ohio, because we know that this could have dramatic impact on our ability to offer basic city services. And some mayors are already having to make some very difficult decisions. We're blessed here because we have roughly $100 million, $80 million in the rainy day fund, and $20 million in the Basic City Services Fund that we can use to help navigate this crisis. But when you have $1 billion budget, you know, clearly that's not enough for the long haul. So how do we manage this crisis, plan for the future, and continue to reopen the economy slowly and safely?
So if you have this dependence here on the income tax, we know the last time around back in 2009, police and firefighters were out on the street asking people to vote for that hike in the income tax because it did fund city services. Do you anticipate that you are now in the second month of having all these city taxes be down dramatically? You still have the same number of services. There's a bigger strain on the services. Are we going to see a tax hike proposal to cover all of this?
Yeah, it's not anything that's contemplated right now. I mean, part of this is we plan for the future. You know, when we asked people to support that issue back in 2009, we made a commitment to make an unprecedented investment in economic development. We've done that through formerly 2020, now One Columbus, shown great progress there. Reform city government. We said that through collective bargaining, we'd realize savings for the people of Columbus, and our initial goal was $100 million savings over the course of the decade. We surpassed $150 million worth of savings there. And then the third commitment we made was to restore the rainy day fund and make sure that we were prepared for the next crisis or recession. Talk to a lot of economists right now. There are some folks that think this is going to be a shorter term economic crisis, not a longer term recession. We believe that, based on our first quarter revenue, there's no indication there's going to be that dramatic drop off, but we know and anticipate in the second and third quarters that will be the case, and that is what the auditor is sharing with us at this point. The question is, how quickly does a recovery come? Does it become at the beginning of next year? Does it happen a year from now? And those are the things that we're monitoring and planning for the future.
There are going to be critics, and there have already been critics who have said that the city had no business investing in a new soccer arena in downtown Columbus, that it wasn't the city's job to help have bonds for these massive hotels, private businesses that are being built, particularly in the short north, that Hilton that's coming in. And they're going to look at this and say, okay, now what? Now we do have this financial crisis, and the city has committed tax dollars to these two projects that really should have been funded privately. How do you respond to those criticisms?
Well, as you know, there are no tax dollars from the city that are going directly into the soccer stadium. They're going into infrastructure in that entire build out of that part of the arena district to help us create 4,000 new jobs and those types of great employment centers. Where we've put a lot of our capital dollars and what we're really proud of in public-private partnerships are our largest job centers around the community. There are 10,000 jobs in the arena district. I think Easton, outside of retail, so take all of retail out of the job center that is Easton. It's our second largest job center outside of downtown in the city of Columbus. And job centers at Polaris, what's being contemplated at West Campus, obviously what's happened at Nationwide Children's Hospital and the OSU Medical Center. Those have all been public-private partnerships that have yielded incredible returns on those investments for taxpayers with respect to income tax revenue, which then helps fund basic city services. So we're really proud of the Columbus way. We believe that public-private partnerships are critical to this community and this region's success, and we're excited about the future there. I will tell you that by investing in these job centers, even during difficult economic times, those income tax revenue that comes from those is helping to continue to provide basic city services. So right now, 15 of our largest employers, which represent about 51% of our income tax revenue to the general fund. So those largest employers that are paying the majority of income tax are continuing to pay people. They're working remotely. They're continuing to help fund police officers, firefighters, folks that are on the front line, refuse collection, which is important now more than ever in the midst of a health crisis. And so we're proud of the public-private partnerships that we put in place, and we'll continue to look for more opportunities in the future. Quite honestly, the Columbus way, I couldn't be more proud of what we've seen during this health crisis. The way Battelle has stepped up and are helping to clean equipment for our first responders, not just here, but around the country. The incredible work that Abbott Labs has done with respect to testing. The great work that's being done by Cardinal Health. And then you have smaller companies, IC3D and Rogue Fitness, that have totally pivoted away from what they generally produce and manufacture and build to making PPEs for healthcare responders. Even Middle Spirits and other folks that are involved in distilling spirits for us have changed and are now making hand sanitizer for first responders and healthcare workers. So I think you're seeing the Columbus way in many different ways throughout this community, and I'm really proud of it.
You know, you've mentioned essential services. There has been such an emphasis on let's get the first responders, the essential businesses. Media is considered to be essential. As this gradual startup begins, from your perspective here in Columbus, what are the non-essentials that you want to see coming back first? And let's talk about hair salons, because I'm looking like a chia pet over here.
My wife says I'm looking a lot more like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo these days. So.
But seriously, though, what do you want to see, with your gradual startup plan? Who do you want to see back at work first?
Well, I think obviously folks that are involved in making our economy work. We're blessed with a very diverse economy here in Columbus. The number of folks I mentioned earlier that are working remotely are an incredible part of that. Chase is our largest private sector employers, but we also have 3 of the 10 largest public school districts here in Franklin County. Obviously, Ohio State is a huge employer, Battelle and others. So we think that folks that help to make our economy go, in addition to the folks that are already working, but certainly trying to figure out ways, how can we properly socially distance, ramp up construction? A lot of construction has been able to continue to happen because folks are able to practice social distancing and are working outside. Obviously, we're getting the heart of the construction season, and those are lots of great jobs that people need to support their families on. But manufacturing, logistics, I think those are critical pieces. We do know the hospitality industry has been probably single-handedly the hardest hit, and will take the longest to recover. But the great part about all the work we've put into building our hospitality economy here in Columbus over the last 10 years, I mean, landing these conferences that in conventions that we would have never been on the map for 10 years ago, have us in a good position. There are many folks that are simply moving their conferences and conventions back. They're not moving them away from our city. But that's going to be a critical piece, because there's so many folks that probably on the lower wage earning scale that have been totally wiped out during this. I talked to a woman last week. I'll call her Patrice to protect her privacy. But during the Great Recession, she lost her home, foreclosure, lost her job, almost lost her kids. And for the last decade, she's worked 2 jobs, worked hard, played by the rules, and was finally starting to claw her way out of poverty.
Heartbreaking.
In the last 6 weeks, all gone. She'd never been to a food pantry before. She'd never asked for help. She had never gone to her landlord without being able to pay the rent. That's who I'm thinking about with respect to this recovery, is making sure that Patrice has what she needs to continue to support her family and send those kids to college, which is what she dreamed about.
Part of the recovery, too, is not just going to be when government says it's okay, you can all start coming back again. Part of it is going to be the psychological factor for people who might be afraid to go back into a restaurant, who might say, why should I risk going to a hockey game? Why should I risk going to Ohio Stadium where 100,000 people are packed together? Is there anything in the works to help people have more confidence in public safety when this virus is still out there?
Absolutely. I mean, it's really taking the incredible will and the momentum that's been built across this community and across this state around taking care of each other, practicing social distancing, checking in on our neighbors, making sure if there are folks that feel uncomfortable or unsafe leaving their home, that they have access to food and those things. Taking that and galvanizing a movement about reclaiming our confidence. The Columbus comeback is going to be based on our collective community will, this Columbus way, the spirit of Columbus that Doug Kreidler talks about at the foundation. And it's going to be done slowly and over time. But we're going to have to take this incredible momentum we built of commitment and commitment and investment in the common good. We have groups all over the city that are stepping up in ways. There's the Women to Women group that started over around Mifflin when they knew schools were going to be closed, that prepared bags of food and $25 gift cards to Kroger that they gave out to families because they were afraid kids, at that point they didn't know there'd be the meal sites. They were afraid kids were going to go without meals they counted on for school. I mean, even your partners, that we're so grateful for, WCMH, we did a diaper drive here just recently, a virtual call for. So in the midst of all of this, nearly 500 people called. And I don't think we have a final tally yet, and we'll save that for us to celebrate with the WCMH family in the future. But let me just say this, tens of thousands of dollars were raised for moms with young kids who are feeling the strain of the economic conditions that are out there, but still needed diapers and wipes and those types of things for their kids. That is the spirit of Columbus. That is the Columbus way. And so it will require a pivot, but it will require all of us knowing that the Columbus comeback, we each have a role to play in that. Practicing social distancing, following the guidance of public health experts, but at the appropriate time, getting back out there in a way that we can make sure that everyone here is safe, but that Columbus can return to the quality of life that we've enjoyed in the past.
We certainly are seeing a spirit of community. You can even see online people reaching out to each other, and you see people lining up outside the windows of nursing homes and families reconnecting in different ways. You almost wonder, is that the kind of spirit that you can tap into and continue post-crisis when we're trying to start up again? Are you doing anything to maybe try to manage that spirit of Columbus moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been working very closely from the outset of this with the Columbus Foundation, the United Way of Central Ohio, public and private leaders, the Columbus Partnership and others, to really think about these three phases that I've talked about: the public health crisis, the human services crisis, and then economic recovery. And those conversations and work will continue on because there are lots of needs out there right now. And so our office is coordinating with the foundation, the county, some of the larger private corporate foundations about incoming requests. And that's where the funding for Life Care Alliance, the YMCA, the Urban League, the Shelter Board, because we're doing that together. Who has resources to bring to bear? How can they be used? Hopefully we'll have additional resources coming from the state through the CARES Act at the federal level. How can we use that in our COVID response as a community to help with that human service crisis that's taking place to prepare us for economic recovery? But yeah, I think that what you've seen and what you've experienced and what you've felt, we as a city can galvanize that. Thinking about, again, through an equity lens, shared prosperity during this economic recovery is going to be so important. If you don't, the divide, the divisions, the disparity that existed before, health crises, disproportionate negative impact on people of color and poor neighbors, those divisions and disparity can deepen and widen. And so I don't think the equity agenda has ever been more important than right now as we plan and contemplate the Columbus comeback.
You've mentioned, I know the Rainy Day Fund is a huge resource that the city of Columbus has that a lot of other cities in Ohio do not have right now. But as this strain is put on those resources and as you dip into that Rainy Day Fund, how low can you afford to let that go before you start thinking about job cuts or tax hikes?
Well, luckily, we've had an outstanding former city auditor and current city auditor, an outstanding group of council members and directors that have always been focused on how do we prepare as best as possible for a crisis like this, and what are things that we can be doing to make sure that we can continue to provide basic city services potentially in a different way moving forward. And so been very proud of the team that's been put together. Obviously, we're going to continue to contemplate. We do believe that quarters 2 and 3, based on information given to us by the city auditor and her take on things, will be our roughest quarters. The question is then, what does quarter 4 and obviously quarter 1 of next year look like? So we're going to continue to watch that. As I said, we pretty much have a freeze in place other than folks directly responding to the COVID-19 crisis and first responders. And we'll continue to monitor that and continue to contemplate how do we continue to provide these essential basic city services within the budget parameters that we currently have. But that's why that phase 4 is so important. You know, when you think about it, 85% of Ohio's economy, 85% come from metros. So if metros are struggling, if Cincinnati, Columbus, Dayton, Cleveland, Toledo are struggling, Ohio's struggling. And Ohio cannot recover if our cities aren't stabilized. And that's why this phase 4, that's why we're out working very hard with Senator Brown and Senator Portman. I know Governor DeWine talked to Senator Portman just today about this because the governor understands it. He understands that Ohio cannot come back and cannot thrive unless Ohio cities do. So we are grateful for his advocacy and partnership. You know, I think back to where we were just 6 weeks ago. No cases, no cancellations. And there is Governor DeWine and I in a room full of folks contemplating about what to do on the biggest weekend of the year in Columbus. $53 million economic impact. Thousands, 60,000 folks coming together every day over a 4-day period. 22,000 athletes from 30 different countries. I think 30 of them coming from, at that point, the 5 countries in the world that were certainly being monitored and watched, obviously China, Japan, Italy, Iran, South Korea. And we had to make some very difficult decisions. And the governor and I have gotten a lot of credit for that. But you know who the real champions of that effort were? Dr. Amy Atkin and Dr. Mashika Roberts. Dr. Roberts had been working with the Arnold for weeks leading up to that point, trying to figure out some way that they could safely accommodate what we all know is one of the biggest events of the year. Every hotel room in Franklin County was booked, $53 million impact. A huge, huge event, and an incredible relationship that we've had with Governor Schwarzenegger and the Lorimer family for 30 years. We were supposed to go out that morning and announce the additional safeguards we put in place, but as you knew at that time, things were literally changing by the hour. And it was the leadership and expertise of Dr. Acton and Dr. Roberts that had the governor and I understand the full impact of what would happen if we let that proceed as planned. And literally, the governor and I stepped out in the hallway. I won't share our conversation because
oh, go ahead.
Private conversations between governors and mayors aren't for display. But there was a critical moment of trust between a Republican governor and a Democratic mayor around one of the biggest events of the year when nobody else was canceling anything, And I knew at that point that we had the right person in the right role who was going to make tough decisions based on listening to public health experts, listening to medical expertise, believing in science. Because we ultimately decided, initially we were going to do a local health order and a state health order based on where the venues were with the Arnold. But what we talked about in that hallway, and I think it's played out remarkably well for the state over the last several weeks, is having the consistency and the clarity from the state. But that took courage. And it took trust from local officials to know that the governor would not blink when he received pressure from other folks who wanted to hurry back or open things up based on arbitrary dates and other foolishness, that he was going to stand firm and put the health and safety of Ohioans, regardless of where they live, as his top priority. And I won't ever forget that. And this governor has stood and delivered for the people of Ohio.
When you look back on that now, canceling the Arnold was a shocking move. It sent reverberations throughout the community. I remember that afternoon in the newsroom saying, they're actually going to cancel the Arnold. People can't go to the Arnold. No. When you look at it through the lens of today's knowledge and the experience and the death toll that we have to do every day, it seems like a wise decision. But you both had to be really nervous at that point. Are we doing the right thing?
Absolutely. We were, and we had conflicting advice and counsel from, inside that room and other places, but Dr. Acton and Dr. Roberts were, as clear and direct as they could be. And they were the public health experts and professionals that the people of Ohio have come to rely on. And so what they saw and what they knew and how an event like that and other events that afterwards got canceled, I know there are two decisions, I think, particularly here in Central Ohio, that helped us dramatically slow the spread, reduce the infection rate, and save lives. Canceling the Arnold, having that dramatically changed, instead of having those ticketed events, but not those 60,000 people over 4 days jammed into the convention center and other venues. And then nobody, I think, has really given Dr. Drake enough credit for making a decision very early on when OSU was on spring break to have those students not return to campus. I think they may have been the first school in the state and maybe in the country that made that decision. It was one of those times you're glad that an MD was president of the Ohio State University, because Dr. Drake knew that having all those students return from all the places they had been for spring break was going to create an issue just for the university family, but they've always been viewed as part of the Columbus family and part of the Ohio family. And I think those two decisions, as we look back and study this, will show a dramatic positive impact in slowing the spread and reducing the number of folks who, got COVID-19 and ultimately died from it.
Well, we are going to be taking some questions now throughout this program. People have been, as is the tradition with the Columbus Metropolitan Club, people in the audience get to ask questions at the end of the interview. And Jane Scott is here now with some of the questions from people who are tuning in. And we thank you. Whoever is tuning in, thanks for joining us.
As of my last count that I got, there were well over 500 people. So thank you all for doing this. Question came from Celeste Krolak from the Ohio Department Services Agency. Because of the directive to work from home, those of us who are monthly parkers downtown are still required to pay our monthly parking fee to maintain our spot in the garage, and sometimes it's over $100 a month. Can the mayor help us to negotiate a freeze on these monthly costs until we can return to work downtown, or help to negotiate a credit or portion of the cost be issued to monthly parkers?
It's a great question, and be happy if folks could follow up with my office to see if we can negotiate something. I think it makes sense. And, I think based on the conversations we've had in the community, we're not going to be able to solve every problem and be able to respond to every issue that's out there, because there are a lot of people hurting right now. But anything we can do, what I've seen from the private sector is an incredible amount of compassion, flexibility, and a willingness to work not only with their employees, but with the city, the state, and the county. So happy to follow up on that and see if we can work something out.
Wonderful. This question's from Adori Namigade from WSU News.
Yeah.
Can you please give us an update on how things are going at the new COVID-19 homeless shelter the city is a part of? And then she has a second question. How is the city handling inspections that look into whether businesses are complying with social distancing and tracking health measures?
Thank you for both questions. This is one of those things early on in the crisis we knew was going to be a factor. So our community shelter board, kind of our quarterback for helping to serve our neighbors that are suffering homelessness, saw a dramatic spike. 1,000 new. So folks who had never entered the shelter system before came to CSB seeking shelter. A lot of these folks were living with relatives, maybe couch surfing and other things, but as the virus spread and concern about the virus, they were told by those folks, hey, it's time for you to move on. So 1,000 new people came seeking shelter with the shelter board. And then we also knew our current shelters were not designed with social distancing in mind. You've been there. You know how they're laid out.
It's packed.
And so having those additional social distancing shelters, rec centers, the Y downtown and other places, all significant costs. But I mean, specifically to her question about the COVID-19 shelter, there were folks that had contracted COVID-19, had tested positive or had symptoms, and they didn't need to be hospitalized any further. They were far enough along in their recovery, but the last thing we wanted to do was to send them back to these shelters that we were still actively working on having proper social distancing. And so this COVID-19 shelter that we set up has given us a place to make sure that folks are in a safe place, but that they aren't necessarily spreading the disease until they're able to return to their shelter or to the housing that's being provided by the shelter board. But that has been an incredible, the Columbus Foundation's been involved, the city's helped fund it, the county, other folks that have helped to step up and support that effort, the shelter board, and quite honestly, without Michelle Heritage and some of our health systems, because the shelter board is a shelter organization. They don't know, how are they going to treat, they don't have the medical expertise and the capacity to deal with that, and so our health systems have helped stepped up, as well as the Medical Reserve Corps activated by the county.
And if I could get a plug in right now, NBC4 has just started working with the Community Shelter Board, and in the coming weeks, we're going to be doing programming, and I think specifically a half-hour show focusing on this homeless problem, because it's not just a funding issue, it's a space issue, it's a geography issue, it's a stress on the system issue. So we're going to be having more on that coming up. I think by the end of April, we'll be ready to launch a program focusing on that very problem.
And I think that problem is only going to get worse when the 8-week period for evictions comes to an end and those set-outs. So one of the things I've raised with the governor consistently is, where do we go from there? Because most of those will end, I think, the end of April, beginning part of May. Where do we go from there to make sure we don't have more families displaced and homeless?
We have about 5 minutes left, just a reminder to everybody. So.
And her second part of her question is, how is the city handling inspections that look into whether businesses are complying?
So it's complaint driven, and as those calls come into the Department of Health, they go out and inspect sites, generally inspect it if there are issues where they're violating the social distancing guidelines that are part of the governor's executive order. We give them information, recommendations. If it happens multiple times, they're cited and ultimately fined, but there's generally a 3-step process to that. But it's complaint driven. If folks have any questions or feel like their place of employment isn't practicing safe social distancing or otherwise violating the governor's order, they can call Columbus Public Health to inspect it.
Great. And I have a question from Mark Cross. What are the revenue repercussions, downgrade of bonds for the new Hilton edition, as mentioned in the New York Times this AM?
So the question is, what are...
Downgrade of the bonds for the new Hilton edition. He says it was mentioned in the New York Times this AM.
Yeah, so this is something we're working very closely with Don Brown at the CFA, and we'll know more in the weeks and months to come. But one of the things that we're really focused on is making sure that we are very careful about protecting as much as possible that basic city services fund and our rainy day fund with respect to things. But it has dramatically changed our capital budget. So if it's getting to a question about what our capital budget, we had a very robust capital budget that was prepared about a month ago that is completely obsolete at this point, and it'll probably be a couple of more months before we even have a real conversation about what our capital budget will be in the coming years. As many folks know, there's a direct correlation to income tax revenue and our capital budgets, because we take a quarter of every dollar of income tax revenue and put it into the SIT for debt service. That's how we've been able to have all these bond issues passed for the last 4 decades, maybe 5 decades, without a tax increase, is that SIT program. So if income tax revenue goes down, it has a direct impact on our capital budgets.
This question is from Dr. Bill Lafayette. Has anyone given any thoughts to the risks for Ohio when other states perhaps open prematurely as opposed to when we do?
Absolutely, and appreciate Bill's question. That's why this is so important. But you're right. I mean, if other states open too early and aren't thoughtful and prepared and gradual, as I believe we will reopen under Governor DeWine's leadership in partnership with mayors from across the state, there is a threat. I mean, if you just look all around us right now, things might have been different in those places. It's complicated. There's more density in certain places than other places, and COVID came at different points in time. But clearly, Governor DeWine has been a leader in outlining very clear, sometimes challenging and difficult decisions to protect the health and safety of Ohioans. And I think he will take the same sort of care and thoughtfulness and deliberation as we reopen our economy and our governments.
Well, Andy says we have time for one more question, and I guess I'll ask the question.
Sure.
We were overwhelmed with how many questions we got on our registration page, and I'm sitting here looking at a phone full of them. Is there a way that we can work with your office to maybe get answers for these questions?
Absolutely.
And we're happy to post them on the Metropolitan Club website, or somehow we'll get them out there. So we'll work with your office to try to figure out how to answer those. Is that?
Absolutely.
And if other people have questions going along for the mayor, how do they ask you?
Well, they can continue to pose them through either social media, email to the communications office at City Hall. I would remind people that Public Health has a ton of information on the Public Health website. The city, columbus.gov/COVID-19 resources is another place that people can go, whether they're wanting to file for unemployment, whether they're wanting to access SBA loans, whether or not they need food and shelter during this very difficult time. There are plenty of resources out there, but yeah, we'll work directly with CMC to get responses to those questions.
Do I have time for a quick final political question?
Uh-oh.
You, a Democrat mayor, working very well with a Republican governor, you each have praised each other.
Mm-hmm.
Are either of you getting pressure from your parties about being out there publicly working with someone who's a leader in the opposing party?
None. It's the incredible way that the people of Ohio have come together and rallied around this governor, and the way that he has worked very intentionally with Democratic mayors of the big cities around the state. Let me put it like this. I campaigned and raised money for the governor's opponent. I was very publicly supporting his opponent just 2 years ago. And this governor has been on a call with me every day, had me join the press briefing, this and that. I mean, I think he has really shown what leadership looks like in a crisis, and it has absolutely nothing to do with party.
Thank you.
Very good. Well, we've heard words like Columbus comeback, shared prosperity, the Columbus spirit, and now cooperation between opposing parties. So I hope you found today's forum inspiring and encouraging as much as I did. We wish you were here in the room with us. Believe me, we wish you were here in the room with us, but we appreciate your viewing and your involvement online. And I would encourage you to stay tuned. Immediately following this segment, CMC will do an encore presentation, Why Kindness Matters in Our Community. And I think that's pretty fitting for the conversation we've just had this morning. We're very grateful for support for today's forum from PNC, the Puffin Foundation West, the Columbus Foundation, MORPC, the Tommy Daly Foundation, the Columbus Dispatch, and the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center. We're also grateful for Mayor Ginther and Colleen Marshall. Thank you for your time and your insights. And I'd like to share a personal big thank you for all of you who support the Columbus Metropolitan Club through your continued membership. And if you haven't renewed your dues, now's the time to do it, please. And for those of you who have purchased virtual seats for this event, we really appreciate your support. We're committed to keep the conversation going in Columbus. Thank you so much.